Welcome to Beginnings, a series of interviews focused on the birth of Playback Theatre in Australia and New Zealand 40 years ago. I'm Michael Pooley, and this is the full interview with Judy Swallow, who, as you'll hear, was in the original Playback company, and, together with Jonathan Fox, Joe Salas and Michael Clementi, travelled to Australia and New Zealand in 1980 for a series of workshops and performances that saw the birth of Playback in this part of the world. Judy has seen Playback grow and change over 45 years and shares some reflections about that initial trip and what it meant to the growth of Playback. I did this interview after I had finished the video documentary about the trip, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to add Judy's voice to the mix. In particular, I loved hearing her speak at the very beginnings of Playback. We did this interview on 27th of November 2020 over Zoom, so the audio quality is variable, but ignore that and enjoy Judy's reflections. So, Judy, it's taken us a little while, so it's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you about the trip in 1980. Before we go there, would be if I can ask you just to introduce yourself and give us a little sketch of your connection with Playback Theatre.
Okay, good. Well, I'm Judy Swallow. I think the first time I even had the introduction, Playback Theatre had no name at this point. I was a psychodrama student, and in those days at the Moreno Institute, trainings were morning, afternoon, and night for weeks on end. And after a while, people weren't allowed to come for 3 weeks at a time. But my first connection, J.L. Moreno, had died the year before, and people were just starting up the training in a new way, and new broom sweeps clean, and I had no idea what I was rolling into. And so during this time, it was very intense, and we had Thursday evenings off. And so at one Thursday evening, anyone who wanted to, who didn't have to just sleep, was invited to a recreation room of a church down the street to hear an idea from a young man who had been a psychodrama student, who had spoken up to Zerka Moreno about the idea of a theater made out of people's stories. And she was intrigued, and she gave Jonathan, because this is Jonathan Fox, she gave Jonathan 6 months of rent of this church community center. And that was the seed money. And so then Jonathan had no idea. I mean, Joe was with him, of course, and the people he just invited anybody from the psychodrama world to come to do a little mini workshop. So it just happened to be the time I was there. I happened to be a Thursday night. I remember seeing this guy with very curly, fuzzy hair and very flowing tie-dyed pants, designed and batiqued by Joe.
Yes,
right. And he was talking about his ideals. He tried to be in the theater, and it was just so selfish. You couldn't have a family and be in the theater, and he wanted a theater where you could have a family. And he saw how theater was in New York City, and he said, "No, I want some kind of theater that's as good for the actors as it is for the audience." I remember hearing that and saying, "Oh, that's cool." Yeah. And then he had some other ideas. I remember thinking, wow, he's very idealistic. But there were people at the Moreno Institute from all over the world, and we were doing an exercise like skating on ice around this big room, right? And Jonathan came and skated by everybody differently, as he connects with everybody. And he skated by me, and he asked me what country I was from. And I said, "Oh, I'm from half an hour up the river."
Yeah.
And I saw his tongue just go like this, just like a little bit like this. He said, "Oh, I'm going to meet again next Thursday. We'd like to try to put together some kind of theater thing." And I said, oh, I'm not very exhibitionistic, but I do have 2 friends I could bring. And so that's how I came, and my friends came, and I figured I would stay until I didn't fit in anymore. And that's how I came. I was there at the very beginning when people were experimenting.
Yes, very much at the beginning. You were obviously part of all that experimentation.
Oh yeah, it was really fun experimenting because we didn't know. We say, let's think of a story and see what happens, and let's just all kinds of things experimented with.
So you've seen that development now over 45 years.
Yes, that's true. It's just amazing. And when Peter said something at the end of your documentary about certification in different schools and this, that, and the other, I'm old enough to think, oh, thank goodness I was there at the beginning where it's come one, come all. And if you get inspired, then try it and then see what emerges and then come and connect and we learn from each other. So I'm old-fashioned that way.
So there must have been a real sense of excitement, in that beginning phase, in those first few years.
Yeah, I think so. We were getting to know each other as a company, and there were 11 of us. I think after a year or so, there were auditions. My 2 friends were a plumber and a nurse. So the idea of playback being, I think Jonathan wrote something about this, Citizens, not actors. Citizens could be this. So this was the idea. I mean, obviously coming to Sydney, we saw, oh, whoa, these are people who do acting. That's wonderful. So the ideal of citizens, everybody can learn to do playback and do each other's story. That changed as we interfaced with people who were in the Drama Action Center, and we all got so excited about each other.
Sure. So let's take a little step backwards. Do you have any memory of when the question or the thought of travelling to New Zealand and Australia came up? Do you remember anything around how that trip germinated?
It seemed to be very fast from my point of view. What we were doing was, I think we had developed a tradition of doing the end of a psychodrama conference. It was always held in New York City, so it was easy for us to, we're 2 hours away from New York City, so we could just move everything there. And that's, I think, where we were seen by Phil.
Yes.
Right? And that just takes one person to say, we can do this, and can we do this? And he didn't say, can we? He said, we will do this.
Yes. Well, he spoke about the memory of that performance was still very strongly with him, and he had no doubt he wanted you to come.
Just as we look back karmically, or, the right people at the right time, how could it be otherwise, right? Yeah.
And so was it difficult for you to make the choice to come? Was it possible? Was it, how did that...
At that time, good question, because I had 2 kids, 9 and 11, and I was a single mother, and I had a job as a program coordinator. So all these things I would have to change, but I was determined to come and did what needed to happen.
Wow, that's quite a substantial feat of management to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was one time in Melbourne where we're doing a workshop performance or something, and a woman spoke about missing her children as a teller and chose me to be the teller's actor. And in the middle of the scene, I start to cry. And it was just such a wonderful experience to be seen as part of the process. This is all part of it. It's not, you have to stuff it and not cry. It was part of it, part of the scene, and part of being with each other as a connecting.
That's right. Feeling that sense, connecting with your own experience.
Yeah. But I was kind of in the role of a workshop leader in some way, or co-leader. And I just feel so grateful for having everything being so human.
So because that gives you the sense of just being able to be there without expectation, or?
Well, the role of the teacher or the role of the person being able to dissolve
Yes. Yeah.
was a good thing. You know, it
Yes.
didn't.
Was actually part of the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't planned or anything. It just happened, and yet it's all integrated.
And you mentioned the workshops. Overall, do you have a memory of what those workshops were like in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, my one memory of like, how's Jonathan going to do this? You know, at the beginning in Melbourne, I think there were 25 people in a workshop. And so how is the workshop going to be organized and structured, and how are we going to get everybody the chance that they needed to have to experience playback the best they could? It was very masterful. It's nice. I'm used to doing workshops for big bunches of people now, but I wasn't at the time.
Yes.
So I was very impressed. And then also, this was something very new. It was a risk and a challenge that Jonathan gave himself to give notes to each person at the end of each workshop, each 3-day workshop or something like that,
Yes.
you know? So not only was he going to choose, it's also an experiment to choose people from the workshops to perform with. That's it was an idea, you know? But also the responsibility of giving input and feedback to each member of the workshop, which I thought was very brave and honest and great.
Yes.
Jonathan. I was very impressed by Jonathan's authenticity and desire to not only say, "Oh, we're going to pick this person and this person and this person," but I'm going to show each person how I saw you.
And so for you as a workshop, was that your first experience as a workshop leader with playback?
Yes, I think we might have done a little tiny bit before, but not big workshop leaders. When we came back, oh my goodness, then we had the fire of what we did, and then we had a residential 2-week workshop in Playback Theatre at a country retreat place.
Right.
That was the exciting thing. Beforehand, we were kind of fuddling around ourselves and doing things for ourselves and doing some performances, but it was family and friends. And I think I can't remember if we moved to an arts and science center. Probably we did in a city, from this town to a city. We used to call it the Arts and Fart Center.
Yes.
We'd have performances there. But it was mostly about performing and building community, people finding out about us and telling their friends and that kind of thing.
And so the trip sparked a confidence in being able to spread and teach this form.
Oh yeah, it certainly did. And then it started, you know, exploding around. So thank goodness for all the Aussies and Kiwis who are so enthusiastic and so energetic and so physical. It was especially the Drama Action Center people. I had when I was in college, I did some dance and some choreography, and I just loved the physicality of the people that we worked with. Yeah.
And so you started off in Melbourne, and after the workshops, there were a couple of performances.
Yeah, 3.
And do you have a memory of those performances at all?
Not much.
No,
You know?
no.
I mean, Michael and I were familiar with performing.
Yes.
And the idea of performing with people who are not our little tribe was exciting and interesting, and they were interesting people to perform with. I remember that expansion of possibilities.
Okay.
Because we were just, you know, our original company was, you know, like we've been together a long time.
Yes. So it must have been a little strange to be on stage with almost complete strangers. I mean, obviously you'd worked with them in the workshop, but really...
Yeah. You know, the form just takes over. Now we know that even in different languages, the form takes over. We didn't know that. We didn't even know that we could perform with people other than our little family.
Yes.
You know? So it felt actually familiar. It didn't feel strange at all. It was a nice discovery.
Yes. And you mentioned, that meeting between Playback and the Drama Action Centre. And I got a flavour from what you said earlier that it was quite interesting to be meeting people who were working, and I think Jonathan said this as well, working to develop theatre skills.
Yeah. The physicality was so rich and so exciting. It kind of reminded me of my dance background a little bit.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. It was not the clowning. I liked the Lecoq stuff later on that Heather and other people taught us. And the enthusiasm. One of the things that I remember from going to the Drama Action Center in a conversation with someone, but it stuck with me. I was asking them some things about their lives, that kind of thing. And a bunch of them said, oh, yes, I can come to the Drama Action Center and be a full student because I'm on the dole. And another one says, yeah, me too. And I thought, isn't that the most wonderful thing? What a great country to be able to do that and to be supported in what you want to do. It was not the way the Puritan background of the United States, if somebody's on welfare.
Yeah.
It was a light and a happy tone.
Yes. And I have to say things have changed here now, of course, too. I suppose, again, the workshops and performances in Sydney had that same flavour. Does anything stand out for you from your time in Sydney?
The Nimrod Theatre was big. I tend to believe that playback is much better in intimate areas. And it was very interesting to me that people would come out at 10:30 at night and tell stories and how the stories come about. So,
Bridget remembers being quite shocked by how many people showed up. So it was probably a bit of a shock all round. One of the things that Peter remembers, and having seen the video, I don't know whether this sparked a memory for you at all, but he remembered a trip to Ku-ring-gai National Park towards the end of your stay in Sydney, a walk out in the bush. Mm-hmm. And during that day, at some stage, a conversation between Bridget and Francis and Mary with you all about starting a Sydney company. Do you have any memory of that?
If I do, it's something that was so organic,
right?
That it didn't land really.
Yes.
It's like, oh, okay, of course,
right,
of course. It was something that, sure, of course.
And that's what Jonathan and Joe said as well. There were, it wasn't something they planned, but it was a very organic result of the workshops and performances.
Right. Just to go with the energy of it. Yes. This reminds me of a story from way back when. I don't know if you know, in an American culture, there's something called Johnny Appleseed.
I do, yes.
Yeah. And so early days, we would tease Jonathan, or maybe he was the one that brought it up. I don't know. In the early idealistic moments before playback had a name or anything, or any forms or anything, I think that was something of his inspiration, where this guy just went around and planted apple seeds wherever he went.
Well, certainly, that trip really was a seed that been a real flowering of people's creativity and, sense of connections.
That's very interesting. I was on the IPTN board for a long time in the early days too. First of all, did we want an international thing? That was not a given. Yes. There were a bunch of people brought together, and each person had input on pluses and minuses of trying to get an international organization. It would be a lot of work. Was this important or not? When it came around to me, why did I want this?
Yes.
Because that's the question. Why do we want an organization? I had been in the Peace Corps, in the American Peace Corps. And I know Jonathan was in the American Peace Corps, and Joe was in the New Zealand Peace Corps-ish.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting that we all had that interest.
Connection.
And I remember saying, well, you know, being in the Peace Corps meant that I could go to any country and look up the Peace Corps volunteer there and always have a place to land and to sleep and to be introduced to that culture, you know.
Okay.
And I said, that's what I want from Playback.
Yes.
I remember that's what I said in my own selfish way. I like to be able to travel around, connect with the Playback people. What I was on the track of before I distracted myself was how interesting it is for me culturally to see how the different countries or cultures embrace Playback. You know, for example, Germany, they have Playback everywhere. And Israel, there's a Playback, everybody knows Playback Theatre.
They do, yes.
Right. And in Germany, they have the reunions every few months. And Japan, people know where they belong and whatever the rank is of the ability. And in the United States, this Boston group that I was telling you about is working very, very hard to have something called PNA, Playback North America.
Yes.
And they're very adept at the technology and very adept at having different people speak on different topics. They are such hardworking people. And I think in the United States, there's kind of like a backpedaling or something. I don't know if that's, I'm maybe too old to do anything except look at my intuition there. But these people who have been doing this from Boston have worked their tails off, trying to get North American people to connect with each other.
Yes, and it's interesting here for us to see there's been ups and downs in Australia with the level of connection we have both within and with the rest of the world. And that was part of what I recognised in Montreal when at the conference there, that we here in Australia and New Zealand have been more isolated than we were in the early days. And that's starting now to break down a bit. But I can see what you mean. There's different flavours and different connections. So going back to, you certainly mentioned the physicality that you felt, particularly, you know, when at the Drama Action Centre. Were there other qualities or aspects that you noticed in those workshops and performances? It's a long time ago now, so it's hard.
Yeah. Just the sense of experimentation. I led something on quality of touch. You know, who knows what that was all about? But you know, that was interesting to me, and so I just did a little mini exercise about it.
Yes,
that kind of thing. The openness to experimentation. That's the flavor I got from the Drama Action Center. I like that. And I don't know if you know, Bridget came, and I'm part of Community Playback Theatre. We're in our 32nd year where we are. And Bridget came to work with us once when she was in the United States at a retreat center. That was just such a sweet connection. And of course, Francis worked with us too when he came. It was nice to receive Bridget and receive Francis.
Yes, that kind of circling around or completion of a circle.
Yeah.
Mary spoke a little bit about her time, her month or so, with the company that following year. Do you have any memory of that?
Just love. Nothing particular. No. She just fits right, as you know, Mary, she fits right in, and she's so warm and funny and puts everybody, or past tense, but she's still in my heart. So puts everybody at ease and shares her own process as well. It's so good. Yeah.
Yes, and it obviously, when she spoke about it, was just a very important part of her immersion into playback and what that then gave her for the rest of her exploring and experimenting.
Yeah, that was great. It was just wonderful. So this cross-pollination is lovely, right?
And following Sydney, of course, you then went to New Zealand. Was that pretty similar? Were there differences? Do you have any memory of what that shift was like?
I think, well, I remember some of the places that we stayed, which are beautiful nature places. It was a little more subdued, perhaps. Maybe we were more tired. Joe's family is in Wellington, so when we first came over, Jonathan and Joe's children stayed with their grandparents there in Wellington. So that was nice, and I just remember how beautiful. There was a beautiful place we stayed in Auckland.
It's a beautiful country.
Yeah, it's so lovely, and it's fun to go and see the family of somebody whose stories were about. It's like, right. Another thing that I need to say, just because my heart is warm for this, is that Michael and I were very good friends. He died of AIDS in 1992. We were friends for a long time, and we enjoyed acting together. We kind of knew each other well enough so that our backs could be to each other across the stage from each other. We'd kind of be able to, one of those things, which was great. And we discovered when we were walking around the streets of somewhere that we both were attracted to the same kind of men. Walking down the street. Oh, he's very good looking. Oh, look at him. He is 10 years younger than I, but it was fun because especially, I can't remember where we were, but Joe has a very lovely, impish sense of humor. And people, it must be in New Zealand, because people were saying, well, I know we can put Jonathan and you up here, but what about Michael and Judy? What are their sleeping arrangements? They're trying to be very polite. And she said something like, oh, they get along fine, or whatever, because Michael and I could sleep anywhere, sleep with each other, sleep on the floor, sleep in the same bed, and however it was. But
it was make do.
Yes, it was very funny. Her little impish sense of humor, where she got the hosts a little confused.
Yes, I remember Joe saying that the trip was a very bonding thing for all of you.
I have to tell you a story. We all had our children around the same age, and the children all kind of grew up, and another member of the original company and I taught children's classes for some time. And then once we had, I think it was the 10th year, 10 years of playback, right? We had little buttons. And Joe created T-shirts for all these people who were teenagers at this time. It was a navy blue T-shirt with very lowercase white letters, very lowercase white letters, saying, I wish my parents were normal. We gave them to all the teenagers.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
So we all had our kids growing up together.
Yes. So look, thank you. There aren't other questions I have. If there's any other memories that come to mind,
I think I like the being on the dole, being a way in.
Yes.
Way in, and I wanted to make sure that I was struck by how important that was as permission for people to expand and be creative and be curious and have enough financial support to explore in early days. It's really good. Yeah. And I just loved all the time I've seen Peter Hall act, even, where was it? Somewhere out west. There was one where Peter did something that was so dramatic with something around his neck. Can't remember that, but I remember it was stunning to our whole audience.
Yes.
Yeah. And then also, I don't know if I didn't go to India, but you were in the Montreal conference and I was too. And how I wonder, because it's happened other times, I wonder if the conferences where people start out saying how great playback is and it's our mode of communication, it often goes to very bitter places where people either are hurt or feel victimized or it's a chance to get to not be all happy, happy, happy.
Mm.
It's a chance to get some of those hard feelings out.
Mm.
And I don't know, I mean, there was once in Japan where there was a really big healing where there was enough time to have some very different cultural difficulties listened to and heard, and tears flowed and everything else. But sometimes there's not. And it seems to somehow end up with a kind of icky feeling, at least for me sometimes. How about you?
I certainly agree that while the two things seem to be there at the same time, both a sense of connection through this form we're all trying to work with, and almost the inadequacies or the challenges of meeting such various individual and cultural needs, because it came again in, I'm not sure if you've heard feedback, but in India, you know, the question came up very strongly about the place of women, you know, of other minority groups, and just how is this valued, and is it valued strongly enough? And, you know, how is it that, you know, we're not getting better at managing some of those things. So it was certainly, yes, there's two sides to those international gatherings, and you're right, it's probably the opportunity to remind us all of how various we are, and how sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah. So there's the idealism at the beginning and the harsh realities.
Yes.
Yeah. Were you at the Perth conference? That was the first one I missed.
I wasn't. I had a long break. I joined the Sydney company in 1987 and was there for a couple of years, but then had a long break, and so rejoined in the early 2000s. So I didn't get to Perth.
That was the first one I didn't get to. I heard that there was a difficulty there too. One of the first times there was.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And that was a fairly homogeneous culture.
Yes, that's right.
But then the differences in the culture came right out from the center core out to the surface.
And I think, you know, it will be interesting to see while the virtual playback is still struggling to find its place, one of the things that it has given is a stronger sense of connection. So I attended the European playback conference because it was virtual, and you know, I was up at 2:30 in the morning, but you know, right. I was able to be there, and I wouldn't have been there otherwise. And
so, that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah. And you and I are talking to each other.
That's right. Yes.
Right. It's so nice to see you, and I'm still struck by your idea about history and letting the younger generation know where they came from.
Oh, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to, I mean, you're partly to blame. Jonathan and Joe and you did a session at Montreal.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it was there that, and I can't remember which of you mentioned it, but it was there that I heard for the first time that trip had been so central to the way many things developed.
Yes.
And I hadn't been aware of that. It was then sort of a stimulus to explore that a bit more with Bridget and Peter, of course, and, you know, who I have, you know, regular contact with. So, so for me, it's been delightful. And, you know, even today, just hearing, again, different aspects to that trip just fills out the picture really wonderfully. So thank you for your time and for sharing.
Well, I'm so glad I have a chance. And will you please give Bridget a big hug and Peter a giant bear hug for me? Yes. Now then, I wish we were present. Well, we can't hug anyway nowadays.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
That was an interview with Judy Swallow, member of the original Playback Company. You can hear the full interviews with others who were instrumental in the founding of Sydney Playback at its website, playbacktheatre.com.au. Click on the menu and then enter History in the search bar at the bottom of the page. Each of the interviews has more than I was able to include in the edited video version and are worth a listen. Please email me at michael.pooley@iinet.net.au if you have memories, photos or stories to share about Sydney Playback Theatre at any stage of its 40-year history. We'd love to have those for our archive. Thanks for listening.